Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second Prime Assembly, where we will spend the next 2 days looking at the questions of gender and sexual orientation. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that each of you has changed your name to indicate the appropriate pronouns. So your first name and your pronouns, make sure that that's on your screen so we know how to address you correctly. So, and second remark, which is really a remark for our Ukrainian colleagues. We really want to say how much we are holding all of these colleagues in our hearts, and obviously they can't be with us today. And we are in solidarity, we stand in solidarity with them, and we look forward to seeing them with us again very soon. So just to introduce today's assembly, I want to come back to our overall goal for this project. So our overall goal is to look at how we can improve higher music education environments by suggesting ways to deal with power relations within our institutions. And in so doing, to look at what standards are realistic to set to achieve safer and more supportive environments. And more specifically, today we are looking at the question of how can we improve higher music education environments in relation to gender and sexual orientation. Now, by way of reminder, this process that we are engaged in together is one of deliberative democracy, in which we have 3 main steps. So the first step is that we learn together, we bring in experts, and we will meet our expert this morning. And we make sense of what we learn from the expert, the information we gain. We deliberate, so we discuss and debate and prioritize. And then we decide. And in our decision-making process, we will be making recommendations, which in the long run, we will vote on. And this is what we've done already in the first assembly. So the end goal is to work together in a climate of respect and tolerance. And we're all learning together. So nobody has the right answer, and we're all exploring together. And the richness of this experience is all the more so because of the many countries and cultures that we represent here. And of course, in our stakeholder assembly, we have students and teachers and personnel, staff from leadership and from the administrations in our institutions. And this also gives us a full view of how these questions impact each of us individually. So to start today, I want to just come back to the statements that you have voted on by online to conclude our work on Assembly 1, and to make sure that everybody really does agree that these statements reflect the work that we did in the first assembly. So as stakeholders of the Prime Assembly, we believe that addressing power relations can strengthen higher music education institutions. We think language and tools should be developed to address power relations clearly and successfully. And finally, we often experience processes and spaces related to power relations currently available in institutions as inadequate and believe they could be improved. Therefore, these are the 5 statements that you have voted on. We strongly recommend higher music education institutions to create networks of care, to provide students, teachers, and staff with support for their physical and mental well-being. 2, we urge institutions to explore ways of fostering dialogue by creating safer spaces where issues related to power relations can be discussed openly without fear or prejudice. 3, we propose the creation of a glossary related to power relations and empowerment and annual workshop sessions to address the issue. 4, we urge institutions to engage more conversations on the topic of power relations, for example, through the development of specific learning modules. And 5, we urge institutions to empower students, teachers, and administrative staff through implementation of obligatory workshops and training to understand and recognize positive and negative aspects of power relations. So I would just like to ask the Assembly here whether we can reconfirm agreement with these statements. And if there are any concerns, please raise your hand or indicate that you have a concern in the chat. So this is a wonderful silence, and I'm assuming that your silence is a statement of agreement, and I would like to congratulate you on the remarkable work you did, because I think these are very powerful statements, and they really stand together as a representation of all the work you did in the first assembly. So with that, we are going to dive in to today's work. And in our first work, we are going to group together in language groups, because the question of gender is an eminently linguistic question. Now, in English, it may be less of a story, but in just about every other European language, it's definitely a story. And we know that, that there are different ways in which language is in fact gendered by the way you use articles, and even that music, there is gendered language. So for example, we may talk about masculine or feminine themes, pianissimo, dolce, or a feminine cadence, for example. So there are many ways in which gender enters our language and our conscious and unconscious minds. And so we want to explore this in a group where you're speaking the same language. So we are going to group you together by language, and we are going to ask each group to choose a moderator. And we're going to ask you to refer to the definitions which you will find in the chat for these 3 words. And I will state them again just to start out. Just to be clear that the vocabulary for everybody is understood. So sex assigned at birth, the sex, male, female, or intersex that a doctor or midwife uses to describe a child at birth based on their external anatomy. Gender is not the same as sex. Sex comes from biology. Gender is a state of being and a mode of life. And this is something we saw in the philosopher's video. And finally, sexual orientation is an inherent or immutable, enduring, emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. And it's important to note that an individual's sexual orientation is independent of their gender identity. So you are going to be placed in your linguistic groups, and you now have 20 minutes for this exercise. And we're asking you to look at gendered language and gendered language in music in your specific language. And you can refer to the definitions in the chat. So welcome back. And we hope that this first exercise was a good way to jump into this very complex topic and just make you feel more aware of how these issues can have an impact in your own languages. We are going to go into another set of breakout rooms where we're going to look at the question of how gender and sexual orientation impacts music making. So you're going to be put into 7 groups, which include students and teachers and staff. And in each of the groups, you are going to be asked to choose a moderator. Now, I know that many people think that's a terrible task, but in fact, the members of the Assembly Working Group will take notes. So we're asking you to do this so that we can take notes and have a trace of what you discuss. And the questions we're going to be asking you are, how has your gender or sexual orientation affected your musical life? And how have your musical skills and competencies ever been undermined or undervalued due to gender or sexual orientation? Or conversely, did you ever feel privileged on the basis of a perceived or assumed gender and or sexual orientation? So we have 30 minutes for this discussion. And when we come back to the plenary, we will ask each group and each moderator to share one example of what you discussed. So we're going to be joining our breakout groups, and we will see you back here in 30 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I hope this was an interesting exercise. It certainly was in the group that I attended. I'd just like to ask each of the moderators to share 1 or 2 or even as many as 3 examples of what really stood out for you. So Megan, I don't know, in your group.
Yeah, Megan just told me that her sound isn't working, so maybe the moderator of her group can say something and introduce themselves and how they discuss the topic. Yeah.
That would be me, or am I wrong? Yeah. Okay. I would state out one statement, which is, I think quite good. Women have to pay attention to what the body is talking about, and about not about you. It's more about performing and not about the music for women, I think. And yeah. We also discussed about the age is more important for women than for men, and you have to look young, you have to look pretty, and also always smile, and you can't be angry. In opposite to Beethoven, who is always captured as an angry man, and that doesn't work for women. And yeah.
Thank you. Jesus, I don't know if you want to speak, or does your moderator want to speak?
No, my moderator will speak up. Tino, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. we talked about two different things. Both of them were about privilege or being held to a higher standard. A person in our group talked about a situation where a conductor or a director of an opera treated a soloist, a female soloist, quite badly. And then when this person stood up to them and said, hey, you're discriminating against women here, this conductor also discriminated against the person who stood up to them. And we found out that this is a more universal problem, because then a second person said, oh, well, in our vocal departments, women are always held to much higher standards than the men, and they are expected to perform much better just because there's so much more competition for women in the vocal departments and not like the men.
Great. Carolina.
Yes, so Tsarine, please.
Yes, we talked about how even if you're more skilled on paper, have more experience, and know everything there is to know for a certain job, it happens quite often that a man will get the job rather than the more qualified, more skilled, more experienced woman. And that it's hard to definitely know that it's because of the gender of the person that they got the job, because it's obviously, or I would say obviously not said that, of course, a man will get the job. So it's hard to really pinpoint the discrimination there. And another situation we talked about was the different behavior towards female and male students from professors in the teaching situation, maybe giving more effort towards male students than female students, depending on a lot of factors, one of them being the age of the professor, which can also be a factor in that situation.
Yes, thank you. And if I may add, also different approach by members of the orchestra to the female conductors and male conductors. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anna.
Hello, everyone. I will give the floor to Laura, who was a very nice moderator in our group.
Thank you, Anna. Well, we spoke about a couple of very interesting points. For example, somebody mentioned that in their job, they had to endure or put up with very uncomfortable atmosphere, like macho atmosphere. Being a man, I'm talking about a man telling this about inappropriate language and, like, I think this relates more to gender, right? And relating to gender too, somebody talked about the difference in disciplines, in the choice of disciplines when joining music education, like in composition and conducting, there are more male students. In the academic fields, more women in pedagogic disciplines. About gender too, somebody mentioned that when they were adopting leading roles, they embodied like a male role, like they adopted a more masculine appearance, and they try to behave more like a man, and didn't want to show that they were a woman. And that's hard too, we all thought. And finally, I wanted to mention about sexual orientation. This time, somebody told a story about a family member being homosexual and having chosen the trombone as a musical instrument to learn. And after finishing bachelor, this person leaving the musical career because he didn't feel comfortable in the brass instrument atmosphere. not feeling that they belong there, feeling that it was a much male dominated and very violent, very aggressive atmosphere. And I mean, the sexual orientation even came so far as to having to quit a musical career altogether.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Esther.
Right, I'm going to give the floor to Anya, who's been a moderator for the second time already today. So, yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, so our group touched on a couple of different subjects. One subject mentioned was that one of the women in our group was one of the adjudicators or jury members for audition panels in her popular music school. And they had a few little hiccups when it came to students who actually had physical disabilities rather than the gender, because they look for students who have unusual, unique voices. And she felt that the men on the judging panel, as her being the only woman, had a kind of apprehension to allowing, for example, a student who only was one-legged and kind of undermining their capability if they would be able to do the course rather than judge them purely by their talent during the audition process. Another subject we touched was the two guys in our group actually found that they felt quite privileged in their group, but they also, or in their institutions, but they also didn't feel that they had really experienced any kind of discrimination. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just because they're men, and that is just how they felt within their institutions, that thankfully they didn't get exposed to any undermining or gender inequality. And then I suppose the last subject was really talking about singers. For singers, for example, CVs having to have your height, your weight on it, that is quite gender associated and I suppose really unequal. And another subject touched within that then is how difficult it is for trans people within the singing department to really fit in, I suppose. I know within operas, at least, there's a lot of female roles that are where they play men, and in older operas like Baroque era, men would have like soprano parts and stuff, but it's actually quite difficult to fit in as a trans person within this department, I suppose. And we were just kind of going around that and how that could be resolved.
Thank you. And so I'm going to give a few examples from our group, which was an all-female group. And there were many, many examples of discrimination based on gender. And I will share a few of them. In one example, a person who was on trial for an orchestra position and was on tour was invited by the chief executive to their hotel room. And when they did not respond to that, they were practically immediately ended in their trial with the orchestra. These examples, there were several people who gave examples of being called by a conductor to a hotel room or a member of the orchestra, and then not wishing to give into that, but being put in a very difficult position. We also had examples of how gender has an impact on finance with a jazz performer who is one of the few women in her institution, and also with in the bands that she plays with, and that she gets many fewer, if not any, offers to substitute, whereas the male performers do get these offers. So that's a very concrete example. And then I think that we've touched on this in different examples that have been given, that there's just stereotyping about how people should look, how people should act, how people should speak, and that there's also, generally speaking, much more criticism of women within orchestras or within other settings. And finally, another example was given of an examination where the jury was in an auditorium, and when the women were on stage performing, the jury would be looking at their telephones, and when there were males performing, they would be looking at the performances. So we see that there's a long road to go on, but I think that this is already a very rich.
Gretchen, sorry, Gretchen, there is one group missing.
Oh, Constance, sorry.
No problem.
No problem. I'm sorry.
No problem. I hand over to Max from Mannheim.
Yeah, never mind. We started about also talking about personal experiences, and we just had like a little example that somebody wasn't booked for a concert as the booker was directly just looking for a female soloist, so somebody wasn't somebody wasn't booked just because of his gender. But then we also, as we're at the topic music and gender, we talked about it. We came to the point that many instruments are connected to genders, like in people's minds. For example, flutes are played by female players and the conductor is always male, and trumpets and stuff, or brass bands, they're played by male players, and that this is also a problem, but that might be a problem with which already starts earlier, like when kids start to play an instrument. For example, little girls, they see, a friend of mine, she's also playing the flute, so I also want to play the flute. So the peer group problem, so to say, starts earlier, and when they come to university, it's too late, so to say, to change the instrument. But then we also hoped or had the impression that when, nevertheless, which gender you are, when you're at the university or when you're in a professional part, the higher the level is, the more the gender topic disappears. So it's more about the competence, and this is actually the goal we should have, that people are judged by their competence and not by their gender. But then also our group, we recognized that we were just talking about male and female players, and we didn't mention yet the topic of non-binary people. And that this is a topic where there are no role models yet. And in general, that non-binary, the topic is annoying for some people. We had said that some people, we have the impression that some people say, yes, it's okay, but don't disturb me with the topic, because this is a point when we talk about non-binary people, it comes to the point that everybody needs to move, especially in the language, in something which we use every day, and it's uncomfortable to move yourself. And this is why we have the impression that we talked about it. We think that some people are, let's say, annoyed by this topic, not because there are people who define themselves as non-binary, but as it concerns us in our language, for example, and moving yourself is always, uncomfortable. We just said, I think that was the final point. Male, female is important, and it's good to see that there are more and more female conductors, for example, but the topic of non-binary is something which we are very interested how it's going to be in about, I don't know, how we talk about this in about 10 years.
Thank you. That was a really important addition to our conversation. We're coming to the end of this first Zoom session, and we will be having a break now. And when we come back, we will be addressing the issue of gender and sexual orientation with the help of our expert. And we will also be watching a video. And we have lots of wonderful exercises to continue with in our day, but I think that we've already made a fantastic start. And I want to really thank you for all of you for your engagement in this process and all that you're contributing to making our learning process such a rich and valuable one. So we will see you back here in 1/2 an hour at 11:30. Thank you.